You have heard me talk about transgenderism from every different direction for the past 5+ years. And something that a lot of people don't talk about is the dark underbelly of the ideology of transgenderism. It was believed at one point, even by me a few years ago, that these are all people who are genuinely confused. They have gender dysphoria or body dysmorphia. They look in the mirror and it doesn't feel like them. They feel like they're trapped in the wrong body. And I believed that most people who felt this way were born with that, or at least they started feeling that in childhood. And I have always felt, of course, that it's wrong, that it's incongruent with reality, and that people who have that kind of distress need a kind of therapy that helps them reconcile their mind with physical reality. And while I still believe that, I no longer believe that most people today who say that they're the opposite sex have true gender dysphoria. I believe that gender dysphoria exists as it is defined or was defined in the DSM-5. That's the big manual of mental illness that describes gender dysphoria as the insistent, persistent, and consistent belief that they were born in the wrong body or that they are the opposite sex. And statistically, it was a lot more prevalent in young boys. It was almost unheard of in young girls. And it started from a very young age. But now, of course, what we've seen is this form of rapid onset gender dysphoria, which we learned a lot about through Abigail Schreier's first book. And what was the name of her first book? Can someone look that up and remind me? I should know because I loved it and I learned a lot from it. But this idea that young adolescent girls, what is it called? Irreversible damage, of course. I'll never forget the cover of that book, which is just so iconic and sad. But talked about the research from Brown University's Lisa Littman that showed that these young adolescent girls, while they were teenagers, were suddenly believing that they were boys, and that this actually was the result of something called a social contagion, much like cutting, much like eating disorders, where young girls are seeking some kind of affirmation and validation or maybe escape from trauma. And so they are mutilating their body in some way as a form of control or maybe a form of attention and validation. This is not something that they were born with. It's not true gender dysphoria. It is almost a coping mechanism in a lot of young women to escape from some kind of confusion or true oppression that they dealt with, sometimes linked to their femininity, like sexual trauma or something like that. But then the other side of this is in boys. It's not true today that most of the boys and men who identify as the opposite sex do so because they have gender dysphoria that they were born with or that they developed as a child. But today, it is, I believe, mostly due to pornography. It is due to a sexual fetish that they have developed over time, that there is now a very real algorithmic pipeline via Pornhub and other porn sites that push young men to seek more and more exciting dopamine hits. So the pornography changes from something that is simple to something that might be more erotic, more violent, more subversive. And it gets into not only like different kinds of sexual deviancy, in addition to just pornography, homosexuality, but then gender bending and gender fluidity. And we have talked about, this is very disturbing, but we have talked about a woman who has researched this, Genevieve Glock, who is the editor of a magazine called Redux, and she has looked into the link between something called sissy pornography and the rise of transgenderism, this fetish of wanting to be feminized as a man, wanting to be submissive as a man, and how this very much has to do with this rise of transgenderism among a lot of men. So it's true that these men who want to go into girls' locker rooms, who want to go into girls' bathrooms, are not doing so because they really think that they were born in the wrong body, but because they're perverts. Those are the exact opposite kind of men that you want infiltrating women's spaces. Of course, you don't want any man doing that, but especially not a man who is a sexual deviant in every way and who actually gets off on humiliation. Humiliation for themselves and humiliation for women and girls. This kind of sissification porn actually depicts women as objects and depicts women as just things to be degraded and humiliated. And so I believe that that is what is motivating the majority of transgenderism among men today. And I just want you to know that this is not nuance, that this doesn't deserve more of our empathy, that these people don't deserve to be allowed into any women's spaces at all. But I want you to stare at it in the eyes as sexual depravity and perversion. That doesn't have anything to do with gender. It has to do with sex. Like, and I'm not talking about biological sex. I'm talking about sexual fetish and pornography. And one subset of this very dangerous and dark form of pornography, it's very disturbing, but okay, like we need to understand how sin works and how this is actually a link to a lot of the issues that we have today, including political violence. One subset of this pornography that is also pushing these men towards sexual degeneracy and gender fluidity, including transgenderism and non-binary identity, is furry porn. Like, I hate even saying that. Why do we even have to talk about this? And we don't have to go into the details of what this means. I want to try to protect our minds and hearts as much as possible. But we also have to see that this form of pornography is actually leading to, in some ways, political violence that has now affected the president of the United States, who had an assassination attempt against him on July 13th, 2024. And then also Charlie Kirk. I do not think it's a coincidence that both of these men who are suspected as the killers of these top, conservative, one politician and one activist, were also allegedly addicted to this kind of pornography and obsessed with transgenderism. There is something going on morally and spiritually and psychologically and politically here that we really need to understand to shake us out of our stupor, that these are identities or interests that deserve our compassion. The people as image bearers of God may deserve our compassion and our desire for their repentance, but the issue does not deserve nuance. It deserves courage. It deserves clarity. And for us to have courage, we have to have clarity, which means we have to have knowledge and we have to kind of look at the belly of the beast and understand how these things are connected.